All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Blue Group Radio. And today I have a guest with me, a local cop that I work next door to again. So get used to it. I got Thaddeus Kirkhoff on the show today. Thaddeus, welcome, man.
What is up, man? Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. So we were chatting a little bit beforehand, but um, I think I just want to start off with telling the audience a little bit about your career and coming into police work and how that went for you.
Um, Man, mine was a little different. So I came in a little bit older. I graduated from high school, went to college, did my 4 years of schooling because that's what I was told to do. Ended up getting a degree in sociology. Only reason I did that was because there was no math, and so I got a degree that I didn't really know what I was going to do with. And I have a long family history of military, and so when I was leaving college, it was either be the next Van Wilder or actually move on in life and do something. So I joined the military and actually worked out well, paid back my schooling. And so I spent 5 years in the Army as military police. And then I kind of got stuck in that Iraq and back. So I ended up doing 2 rotations in Iraq, and that was kind of enough. At that point, I was married, didn't have kids. And so we kind of made a decision to get out. Of course, my wife wanted to go to Italy, and if I went to Italy, I would just be deployed again, and then my wife would
Mm,
be in Italy without me. So I figured that was a terrible idea.
just to live in
And
Italy, huh?
that
Just to
would have
do
been,
the Italian
yeah,
life.
it would have been
Okay.
great. And then I would have been deployed, and my wife would have met some hairy chest dude with a gold chain and speedo,
Yeah.
and I was like,
Ciao,
yeah.
man. Yeah.
Yeah, so we ended up getting out. My family's still here, and her family's still here in Washington. So we moved back, and again, we didn't have kids at the time, and so got into just kind of short-term jobs, was selling cars. Absolutely hated it. Never quit a job in my life, and walked out middle of the day. Kind of felt
Mm,
good,
yeah.
and ended up doing a little bit of bartending in Renton, which was ironic.
Oh, where
And so
at?
it
Is it
was,
still there?
yeah, it used to be called DC's, and so I bartended there for almost a year, and then it's now the local 907.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
but
Right downtown.
yeah, and so it was funny,
Hmm.
man. I used to actually met a couple of the sergeants and stuff that would come in for after shift, and started applying for departments, and ended up getting picked up. Actually, got hired by Seattle and Renton on the same day, and so I
Mm,
kind of had a choice. And nothing against Seattle, just Renton was a better fit for me, and I'm glad it's the choice that I made.
what a different path it would have been. Very
Hindsight
different.
is 2020, and I still have a lot of buddies that work in Seattle, and it's just funny because I was like, man, I was literally so close to doing it, and I'm glad. I mean, this was before they went through all their DOJ stuff,
Yeah. Very
and
different. Yeah.
very, and it's just it's in for the size of Renton, the size of the department, just like Kent. Um, it's personable. I mean, even with, I think the most we had when I was there, I think was maybe 130 sworn, and
Hmm.
everyone by name. You
Yeah.
know people's families, people, and so. But yeah, and so I got in of course, the military police stuff did transfer over.
Yeah. So I
Um,
was going to ask you, well, one, thank you for your service. And then that is a common question, right? People ask, if I'm in the military, should I go into, the MP route or the equivalent, right? Like, uh, master at arms kind of thing. So what was your insight and what was your experience with that?
And it's funny. So I had a little bit of pushback when because I did graduate from college. I had a college degree, whatever that means now. I don't, people are like, oh, you should have gone as an officer. Well, the one thing
Mm,
for if you go into as an officer, you don't get to pick what you do. My dad was military police, and I've always just kind of had a kind of a background in it to where I kind of understood it, knew it, and had a desire to do it. So that's what kind of drove me towards military police. And it's a cool MOS where you get to do different things when you're stateside. You get to do your standard, typical police work, and then overseas you just have a bunch of different jobs. And so, even in Iraq, I mean, we did a lot of stuff with engineers, we did a lot of stuff with infantry, and so it was pretty cool to have that different experiences. And so when I came to law enforcement on the civilian side, I think a lot of that transferred over. And I tell it's funny. I get asked that all the time, like, hey, is the military a good option? I said, I've never seen it as a bad option. It's
mm,
always, especially when you're looking at, I say kids just because I'm older now, but you take a young adult who's 18. Well, you can't be a cop until you're 21. And so what is a better way to go get life experience? What's a better
Yeah.
way to go get discipline? What's a better way to learn, you know, to show up on time? And they tell you what to dress. And you learn a lot
Hmm.
about that. You learn a lot about yourself. You know, they tear you down, they build you back up. But I've never seen it in a negative manner to where somebody comes out like, wow, I really hated doing that. And I guess you have that in everything, but where it transfers over to law enforcement, I mean, it gives you a really good, you know, even if it's a 3-year window and say, hey, I got 3 years of training, I have 3 years of life experience. Here's my resume that actually has something on it now. So I think that's a
Yeah.
big bonus.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, what was the transition like when you got into municipal policing?
It was, of course, it's very different. The military, especially when I was in, I got out in, I guess, '07. And, you know, things change. And from military to civilian, words are powerful. And knowing knowing what I know now and the things that, you know, we used to say and get away with, it doesn't always transfer over. And there were some people who were ex-military who got hemmed up for it. And, you know, but it's, again, you play the part and you do the right thing. And so I learned a lot from that. The other cool part was too about being military police and a lot of other, not many, but I mean, MOSs like infantry and stuff. I had female commanders, I had female lieutenants, I had females in charge of me. And,
Hmm.
so that was always, it was never a big deal for me to come out and have a female sergeant, you know. And so you know, and some guys that get out of the military are somewhat apprehensive to that, and I'm like, they've been doing this job longer than me, they know the job better than me, so why not learn from them? And
Yeah.
so that, I think some of that transferred over well too, where I had, when I first joined with Renton, I had some female sergeants, and so it was never a big transition for me.
Yeah. Very cool. So, tell us about your career, some of the different assignments, maybe some highlights for you.
Yeah, so I was with Renton for 14 years. Majority of that was patrol. And then man, I was a range instructor. Uh, I had a short stint at FTO, and that's probably the hardest job I think anyone can do. Um, I don't think it matters how well you can do the job, but if you're not able to teach and break things down and train and watch people fail over and over and over again,
Hmm.
um, it's tough. So that was probably the one I struggled the most in. And then one that I really excelled at, I was a hostage negotiator for a long time.
Yeah.
Got to work hand in hand with Valley SWAT, which are top notch. I won't use the word operators because they love that word. Oh my gosh.
They love it and
Um,
they hate it, or
oh,
some love to hate it.
they do. But probably, I mean, some of my closest friendships today are still guys that are on SWAT, and probably some of the best people I've ever worked with as cops just are those guys. And just, you look at their level of training, you look at their calmness, and, you know, challenging situations and calls I can think back on. It was always nice to have the SWAT guys there with that level of training and expertise. But yeah, being a negotiator was awesome. I've always felt that, you know, you can talk yourself into a fight, but can you talk yourself out? And I
Yeah.
think that's a
That's the
valuable
magic.
skill. Yes. And that's, you know, and it's, you know, you get, you know, I mean, shoot, after 14 years, you know, you get new officers and you look at them, you're like, are you trying to get in a fight? Because we don't
You're
want to do
saying
that. We're,
everything wrong. Stop
yeah,
talking. Yeah.
we're old. We're too old for this, man. I don't need this. But, you know, learning the art of, you know, talking yourself out and then just expanding that and being able to really help people in situations where they're probably at the lowest point of their life. And so, some good, some bad. Realizing that you don't have control of those situations, and
Hmm.
it can wear on you. But um, yeah, it's. But yeah, I think that was probably one of the most fun and rewarding. And then just, you know, you get being called out and the fun stuff of running code and, you know, going to, you know, a critical situation, knowing that when you arrive, you know, you know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And also having an amazing team. Like, I mean, Valley H&T is very, I think, underappreciated and undervalued, where they do a lot of good stuff. And there were times at the end of my career when I was the only negotiator on in the Valley. And so I'd be driving down to Pacific, I'd
Everywhere,
be
right?
going to Auburn. And so I worked, which was really cool. I got to know a lot of people throughout the Valley. And they understood that, you know, I did have a skill that was worthwhile. And then I think the other highlight for me really, and I know we've talked about this before, but I was a school resource officer for 5 years.
Hmm.
And that's like a diamond in the rough.
Mm.
And I'm not saying for me, but man, it was like a totally different world of policing. And it
Yeah.
wasn't, you weren't writing tickets. Not that I was ever good at writing. I was
You weren't the ticket writer. You weren't the
no.
enforcer.
I had a sergeant tell me once. He said, "Hey, you're never going to go to traffic." I'm like, "Why is that?" So you haven't written a ticket in 3 years ago. That's probably why.
Yeah. Well, I'm good with
But I
that.
mean, but you use those opportunities. You use those traffic stops. You use those stops to talk to people, educate people.
Yeah.
Um, my view of writing tickets was not the thing, but man, being a school resource officer was really cool. I worked at Renton High School, and to see the generational change, to know parents, to know grandparents, to know families that that have been there for so many years, and to be able to impact that many people in a short amount of time was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll come
So
back to that, but I do want to go back to negotiating.
yeah,
We got a lot of soon-to-be cops, new cops. What are some of your basic items or basic reminders or themes that you would put out to just cops from a trained negotiator that was in that role for a long time, of just how to communicate or how to de-escalate people?
I think the biggest thing, and it's something that we harped on, and it is something that I think can be taught, but also I think there's people who naturally have it, and
Mm.
that's the ability just to be able to build rapport quickly. And even outside of negotiating, I mean, it's probably the number one skill um, that you can have, even as just a street cop. Being able to listen, being able to understand, and having an open mind to what different people are talking about, people are doing. Funny story, we were sitting there, the transit center at Renton can be crazy.
Yeah.
And I was coming through the
All
transit center.
transit centers, right?
Man, yeah. And, it was, yeah. And, Renton had a reputation. But as you get to, again, I remember going through there one day, we were on foot, just walking through, and all of a sudden you hear this huge argument, and there's two groups of people, and they're going back and forth, and no stereotypes involved, but it was a whole bunch of young black males, and they were just jaw jacking back and forth. And my partner started to call for backup. I'm like, whoa, wait. Like, just listen.
Mm.
He's like, what do you mean? Like they're about to fight? I go, no. I go, just listen. And I swear to you, we sat there, we kind of crept up and started listening. They were, I'm not even joking, literally arguing if Michael Jordan or LeBron James is better. And I'm
Okay.
talking
Yeah.
heated argument. And I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, this guy's about to call for backup. He's about to call code 2. I'm like, go calm down.
Man.
And I literally walked up in the middle of the crowd and I said, guys, Michael Jordan's hands down the GOAT. Bro, they started laughing so hard. And it was just like, but I mean, it's like, bro, take a second, stop, listen, take in, build that rapport to where you have a piece of the conversation to be able to put back into it. And, you know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
you're over escalating a situation that doesn't need to be escalated at all. And I think a lot of times in police work is taking that moment, taking that pause, taking that moment just to understand the situation before you interject an opinion that might not be correct.
Yeah,
So,
you're jumping to the conclusion, right? And so how
yeah.
much do you think that officer, and I mean, without getting in his or her mind, how much do you think that they weren't listening, or do you think it was just stress from just hearing loud voices?
Yeah, I mean something like that, and I mean you see it all too often, sadly. But I think I think there's some cultural stuff there where that person maybe had not been around that type of group,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't understand it, and so yeah, not trying to bag on that person, but there's somebody who probably needs to get outside their cultural zone a little bit more and
Yeah.
understand that. So, but yeah,
Well,
I mean,
so impactful, right? That cultural competency we talk about, and there's a lot of themes about diversity in policing. It's like, well, if you have a diverse community, then you need some awareness, right? It's not saying everyone needs to be of a different cloth, but that's certainly ideal that we have a lot of range in there, right? That actually also reminds me, you're talking about the military. What place, and this was brought to me as a not, I'm not of the military. I didn't come from the military, but a lot of officers have pointed out, like, where do you have a more diverse group of people, men and women, from literally everywhere in the nation, literally every walk of life, every kind of upbringing, good, bad, rich, poor, culturally, right? So it's all there. And so another proponent of that background.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. In reality of life is you in the military, you don't. It's probably the most diverse place you'll ever go. I mean, I can look back at, I mean, basic training photos, and I can tell you guys that literally had never stepped foot out of Boston.
Mm,
I had a guy from Jersey. It's funny because he was 21, never had a driver's license, always took public transportation, and one of the requirements to be to be an MP was you had to have a driver's license.
right.
And so he had to get his driver's license while he was in. He's
Hmm.
like, man, I just took the bus everywhere. I'm like that. And to me, growing up in a small town, I'm like, bro, we had license. You're 16, and that was your freedom.
Hmm.
Um, but I think and I think a lot of that does transfer over to police because you once again you have a very diverse group and you all have the same mission. And that's same as the military, where it goes beyond race, it goes beyond sex, it goes beyond whatever it may be. But it's like you have a single mission. You're looking out for each other's back. Safety priority number one. But you're it doesn't matter. I don't care if you're a female, I don't care if you're Asian, I don't care if you're black. Like, we all have the same mission here, and
Yeah.
we have to accomplish that. And so I think a lot of that does transfer over to police work because you're not picking who your squad is. You don't know who you're going to be working with. And so, but when it comes down to it, even differences and the reality is in police work is you're not going to like everybody in your squad. You're not going to like everybody you work with. But when you go to a call, we have the same mission here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that's solid. And, we talked about your exposure to service, right? You had a lot of family in the military, and then that led you in and then to be an MP. I don't think I hit, why police specifically? Like, what were you looking for? And what do you think the main driver was for you?
uh, it's funny, man. I'd say it's like military police is so different. I mean, even working, so I was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas. And I think at the time, it might still be, it was the largest military installation in the U.S. And I think our daily traffic was, we had over 100,000 people on post. And so, there's legit crimes that happen, and you have your DUIs, you have your domestics, you have your assaults. And so you get a good background of kind of what policing is. Um, it's kind of crazy to think about. Like, I'm not even joking. We were not allowed to carry a round in our chamber at the time. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
and then and it's like I can't believe we went that long
Hmm.
with that. And then they changed the rules. They had some shootings and stuff, and so. Um, but again, military is different. Where you have 18-year-old young adults come in and they're able to carry a gun, and okay, some of it kind of, I guess, sometimes makes sense. Um, but I think just kind of leaving. I've never been like a huge adrenaline junkie guy. Like, I've been skydiving once. Um, that wasn't up to me, but I did it. But it was, stuff like that. But it's like it's fun. Like, you get a call, you talk about problem solving,
Hmm.
even if it's not a critical incident, and then you get a critical incident or you add tones to it, and it goes up a notch, and it's fun. I mean, you're going to handle somebody's problem that nobody else. You're the only person they're calling to go to. And I don't know. I had a desire. I've always had a desire to help. I've always had a desire to be on that end of it. Um, and priorities change, and um, it was weird to think about when I first became a cop. I didn't have any kids, and when I left, I have four.
Hmm.
Um, and so I guess maybe I need more hobbies. I don't know. Jeez.
I don't know what it sounds like. We have one daughter, and that seems like every kid adds on like basically another hobby and a half because it's all their hobbies outside of just the actual parenting. But we can get into that later too.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's just, I think it was. I think that was the initial drive was, the fun. Um, I love the fact that every day is different. There's no
Hmm.
day that's ever the same. You're not just sitting in plugging numbers. But it's just, I mean, it's freedom.
Yeah,
And again, it's like, again, it's funny. Like I told you before, it's like, I work for a great department. I work for great people. I worked with great people. I have nothing negative to say about my department. I have anything. I mean, I left on my own terms, and um, I wouldn't change it for the world.
for sure, man. Um, all right, we're gonna zigzag back to the school resource officer. So yeah, you started talking about how it's a truly unique opportunity, and I love that we're talking on this. I see more and more news about, so many, in the last couple of years, so many districts and schools don't have school resource officers. So I see in the headlines following police news, this district is talking about it, or they're trying to bring them back at this department, and I've always seen them as such an asset, right? And of course, I'm biased being a cop and being kind of a community relation cop. But man, yeah, you want to talk a little bit about you getting into that assignment? What were you looking for, and what did you find?
Um, I don't know if I knew what I was getting into.
Mm.
Uh, I remember my first day at Renton High School clearly. And if you
It's
know the
like a
demo,
first day of being at school, right?
bro,
You have your little backpack and like a picture at the front
my
porch.
little lunchbox, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it was so funny that, I mean, you talk about, I mean, if you know the demographics of Renton, you have a 6'3", 200, maybe 65 pound at the time guy,
Mm.
white guy in your school in uniform, and nobody knows who you are, bro. I'm talking outside my comfort zone like no other.
Mm-hmm.
And it took time. And I mean, again, it's like nobody trusts you, nobody knows you, nobody knows who you are. They know you're a cop. Um, wow. I mean, that was one of the most eye-opening experiences where I'm like, what did I do? What did I sign up for? What
Yeah.
am I doing here? And it's funny. I've talked to a lot of, different cops that have tried it. There's people who've lasted one day. There's people who've lasted 2 weeks, and they're like, I can't do this.
Mm.
And there's just cops who are like, I don't want to deal with kids.
Well, that's an
Graciously, yeah,
easy, poor assignment for you. Yeah.
yeah. And so I didn't know what I was getting into. Somebody, a couple of people told me that they thought I would do really well at it, and so I kind of took that and ran with it. And then I also saw the freedom in it. I not just freedom of not having oversight, but I got to do a lot of cool things. I got to plan a lot of cool stuff. And then I just got to know tons of, just the infrastructure of a school, from the vice principals to the dean, the principals, everybody. I was able to coach football for 3 years. Just some opportunities that you don't get normally, as just a regular street cop. And so shorter hours. Then I got to also work overtime, which was nice. And so a lot of benefits to it. And then just again, I was laughing. I've been retired 2 years now, and then we got basically removed from the schools due to COVID. And so it's been, almost 4 years, and I just got invited back to graduation.
Oh wow, it's very cool. Very cool. So what helped you build trust with the kids?
Um, Honestly, I think the biggest thing for me, and I think for a lot of people too, is, and I've told people this a lot, but allowing yourself to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the biggest, where people, it was weird. It was weird though. Cause like, there's so many cops out there, and people joke about like, oh, I have a Facebook, but it doesn't have my real name, or, what I mean? Like, but I've never done that. I'm like, the reality is, if you want to come find me, you're going to come find me. I just was never like the asshole cop that I was like, you're probably not going to come look for me. I probably didn't write you a ticket. So it's like
all about that education.
yeah,
Yeah.
all about it. And so, but I think just being vulnerable, and I think the reality where people, not just people, but like the kids at the school see you as not just a cop, they see you as a human. My wife would come to the school, hang out. My kids would come to the school to practice and football games. So it wasn't just me. Oh, here's the school cop. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's his son, that's his wife, that's his, whatever. Like, I had a kid, like, literally saw a picture of my puppy, and they were like, "You have dogs?" I'm like, yeah, like we're normal people, And so,
Yeah,
but it was
people that have
cool.
dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was cool though. I mean, and like I got to go on a bunch of field trips with the kids, and so I wouldn't even dress in uniform, and so I got to
Mm,
wear clothes around them and go to all these different events. And then as I was coaching, of course, I was never in uniform, and so they see you outside the uniform, and then they put you back into. They're like, oh, he's just a real person. That this is what he does for a job, and I think once they're able to again take away from that and again just being vulnerable, being able to talk about it and say, hey, this is where I live, these are my kids, this is my wife, that they're like, oh, you're a normal person but you just come here to work.
yeah.
That's kind of how it works.
Yeah, it's so simple in a way, right? It's just people being people. Like this is the people business. I like to say that. People that come into policing or try to come into policing that don't think that it's about serving others, like people, to include the people that are on the street and people that are in their moment of crisis. Like no, they're the people you're serving too. You're not just trying to move along, some nuisance. Those are human beings, right? And so man, how much more effective we are with public trust and with everything we're literally trying to do when we can just show that we're a person, right? And
Yep.
so oftentimes in recruiting, it became, hey, no, just call me Eric, right? And later I kind of create some issues because now they're recruits and they're calling people, but hey, man, and I'm like, yeah, I was good with me because I'm a
Yeah.
recruiter, but please like start saying Sarge and
Right.
officer this and that. But no,
Yeah.
I think that's huge, right? Because ultimately that uniform and that badge does become a barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think, too, on that same note is that the the cool part about that was really being able to transfer that from like my high school students to other police officers. Like, hey, it's not just me, like we're
Mm-hmm.
all in this. And so, and it was funny. I would get a lot of phone calls off duty from officers, and I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, you're not normally calling me at 9 o'clock at night. And they're like,
Yeah.
hey, have somebody here, but you're the only person they'll talk to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Put them on fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just funny because they're like, oh my gosh, like, what did you do for? I'm like, well, I was real with them. I don't lie to them, and I'm vulnerable, and they know me. But if they can take that and transfer that over, and same thing, talking to kids about, hey, what does it look like to be in a traffic stop? What are things to do? What are things not to do? But and having them be able to understand that, and um, so when it's not just if they see me, it's a good experience. And unfortunately, and I would hear, the backlash of instances where, they didn't have a good experience with a police officer. And number one, like, hey, I'm sorry you had that experience. And again, in Renton, we had multiple jurisdictions of Seattle PD, King County around us, and
Mm-hmm.
it didn't matter who it was. It was just, oh, it was cops. Like, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
where were you? And explaining that King County is a little different, Seattle's a little different. Renton and Kent is different. I think you get. I mean, I honestly believe with Renton and Kent in the Valley, I think we get a higher level of training, and we see that, and I think people understand that. And so, but just being able to explain that and relay that back to a younger generation that's coming up, being, hey, this is what this is what police actually are.
Yeah.
We're real people who are trying to understand if you are going through a crisis or you are going through a situation, like we truly want to help you get out of it. I mean, taking everyone to jail isn't the answer. We know that. And I think that just that, like you said, that education piece is so huge. And if they can pass that on, I think it goes a long, long ways in the community.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big deal. And I think that just to level with people, right? And like part of that's ownership and accountability and all these things that we are so forefront in what we're talking about, especially with community trust and police. But it's like, hey, you might have had a bad experience, and I'm not here to debate or negate or defend that. If anything, I want you to be heard. I want you to feel validated. I don't know what that situation was. I don't know what was going through that cop's mind, and that cop may have made a mistake, right?
Yep.
Or been having a bad day. Like I can look myself in the mirror and I can share with a group of people, whether it's a community meeting or just on the street, and say, hey, I've had a bad day. So if I was dealing with me as a cop, I certainly would not have wanted to deal with me on certain bad days. I might have a bad perception of the police if I was dealing with myself back in that one year on that one call. And so I think that when you actually respond with some level of that humility, right, and like ownership of
Yep.
mistakes, and just, hey, we're not perfect, and I don't, don't try to defend it. I think that we do defer to that historically, traditionally in this job, and I know a lot of reasons why, right? We take great pride, as we should. Like, this is a hard job, and we do get in a lot of undeserved scrutiny, and so it's really hard not to get defensive and take it personally when you do put a lot out there, and your buddies are putting a lot on the line as well. But just to see it from the other side, right? And I
Yep.
think, like you mentioned, a lot of what made you a successful negotiator was keeping an open mind, right? Kind of reserving judgment.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think, honestly, I think you said it too, but it's okay to say that police messed up. It
Mm-hmm.
it goes a long ways to say, hey, yes, there's other ways we probably could have handled that. How many after action reviews you've been to, like, wow, we could have done this better.
Yeah.
We rushed into this a little bit. But again, being vulnerable to go back and say, hey, I messed up, or hey, that cop made a mistake. We're human. We make mistakes. I mean, shoot,
Yeah.
doctors make mistakes, right? I mean, it's, but
Absolutely.
being able to own it and have that personal accountability and say, hey, we messed up in the situation, and I think we could have done this better, and we're going to learn from it, and we're going to implement training from it. That's how you get better in any profession. And so I think looking at it from that, and I think the community and people understand that. But again, I think you have to have that building block of rapport built to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with schools, man, you got to be, for sure, like a leader, right? You got to be a mentor. You're literally a coach, your football coach in these kids. Um, would you say that that's your most important, like maybe your most positive role that you can remember?
Yeah, 100%. I would say, yeah, there's a lot of cool things that I got to do as a police officer. There's a lot of high stress incidents. There's a lot of calls that, that the squad I worked with this last year that I was on was amazing. I mean, you want to talk about awards won and things done. It was fantastic. I mean, we did a lot of cool stuff. I mean, you talk about working side by side next to heroes. That's who I worked with. I mean, I'm talking house on fire, kicking in doors, going in and making sure it's clear, things that
Mm-hmm.
probably we shouldn't have been doing. That's who I worked with, and it was fantastic. And so I look at those things. Yeah, very cool. Did a lot of cool things, but impactful, meaningful, 100% at the school. I mean, you wear so many hats. Coach, mentor, literally had kids call me dad.
Mm. Yeah, you're probably the closest thing that some of them had to that, right?
Yeah. So it's and in the back end of that, where for me, it's I do care, right? It's like, it's not just this heartless, like, I just show up and do my job. It's like, it's like, I care about these kids. I care about the teachers. I care about the relationships. And it also becomes painful when those kids are taken. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's always the trouble. And you see it a lot in first responder work, is people genuinely care, and then they get entrenched in their work, right? Whether it's detectives, or whether it's in the school like you were, and other school resource officers, or in the community, you become embedded. And then when that travesty hits, it hits you personally, right? It's not just your job. It's not just this job that's more than a job. No, it's like you. It's Thaddeus.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was, there was a couple situations that I look back on that it hurts, man. It's real.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you have a mom reach out on your day off that her kid was shot, and he's a kid
Yeah, man.
I told you I wasn't going to cry like Greenway.
Yeah. And so, when Chris, you listen to this, we were trying to clown on you, and tough guy Thaddeus.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's real. And you go through those emotions with a mother that doesn't know what to do. Where it's not my kid, but I mean, he's a kid who was like my brother. And Yeah. Speaking at his funeral was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah, man. Man, I appreciate you sharing that. And we have this
Okay,
weird
we're done with
way.
that. We're through that one. We're good.
Check. Um, we have this weird way, and part of it's survival based, thinking of contingencies and thinking about worst case scenario. But I'll say that every now and then, ever since I promoted, maybe because it's just a position of rank, ever since I promoted, and shortly after I promoted, that's when we lost our friend Diego.
Yeah.
I thought that is my nightmare. I never want to be in a position where I have to say anything at any funeral service, and my head goes to cops. But man, I mean, we see this rough world. We have the front seat to this rough world where cops, we sign up for this danger, and you got a kid who's being, he's a kid, he's a teenager, and so that's hard, man.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's funny. It's not if I use the word funny, but it's like it's different than like, you're on a call or I mean, how many times? I mean, oh my gosh, like how many shootings have you been to?
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you shown up and you're the one that has to, you know, I mean, literally do first aid
Yep.
for gunshot wounds. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the last year, I mean, we did it so many times, um, but there's a disconnect, and then all of a sudden, when it's somebody we know or somebody, you know, that on a personal level, it just
Mm-hmm.
becomes it's real. And so at the same time, I mean, you're able to also apply some of that sympathy to what people around them are going through. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that was, a lot of, I mean, again, I mean, in Renton, I was very well known. I was, always wanted to get out and talk to kids and everyone, again, you just get to know everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
so if there was a crisis scene and somebody was involved and it happened to be a younger youth, it was probably somebody I knew or, and so it also became a valuable resource as well, where people would come and say, "Hey, I know what happened," or "I know who was involved, I know who was there," and so it was able to use that as well. But man, it's a tough one, man. It's a line you walk, and it just yeah. Diego, that was tough. That was another
Yeah.
one that tough to chalk up.
Yeah, for sure, man. Um, on that heavy note, what I mean, you said a couple things that perk my mind in a certain direction, which is again to our younger listeners or newer cops, but man, remember that empathy piece, right? Is we're taking care of
Huge.
people, right? Um, and to those that aren't cops or those that are new to it, yeah, we put on the mask, right? We're at that horrendous scene. There might be multiple victims, and fire medics like swooping people in and out, and there might be just a body with a sheet over him or her, and we're stoic. We disconnect. We put walls up, and those walls might stay on at home because we don't want to feel that hurt. Like we feel it, but we don't want to dwell on it. And so a lot of that is self-preservation. But yeah, man, when it hits home, um, there's no running from it.
Yeah, and I think it's funny now looking at the transition when I made out and like it was like I would never come home and I would never talk shop with my wife. I would never tell her about those calls. I would never. I mean, why take like this stress and trauma and then put it on somebody else? And so
Mm-hmm.
she's like, "Well, you don't tell me about your job." I'm like, "Well, sometimes it's just kind of shitty." I mean, it's
Yeah,
just and
yeah,
like why would I put this on you to where now you would feel it, where I can just compartmentalize it and deal with it my way. Not saying it's the best way, but yeah, no, it's the cool part is I think, and I think Greenway had hit on it too. I mean, you think about the last, I'd say half of my career, people finally started to talk about like, hey, I know a good therapist. I
mm,
know somebody you can go talk to. Like, you didn't say that stuff before. Like, you didn't mention anything. You didn't mention, especially being a vet and having combat experience. Like, I mean, there's so much to unpack from, 5 years and 2 tours in Iraq where I didn't want to mention, what I had seen or what I had done or the things that you dealt with. But it was kind of this transition to where it was like, it's okay to go get help. Like, it's okay to talk to people. And I think once it kind of became more of the norm, especially and I'm, West Coast policing is different than East Coast policing, but especially out here where it was like, you would literally go car to car and be like, hey man, I was talking to my therapist, and people were like, oh, you see a therapist too? Like, oh, it was like, it was normal. Like, and
Yeah.
I think that's very powerful. And people are realizing that, I mean, people joke about it. Like, people say, I don't want to retire because I'm just going to go die. But you have to be able to deal with that trauma you're dealing with. I mean, I think I saw something the other day, and it's probably true, but they talk about how many high critical situations have you ever been in your life, in your career?
Mm.
Most people don't do any of that.
Yeah.
Most people don't see dead bodies. Most people, they don't deal with this. They don't see the carnage that first responders see. And people, I think they're finally realizing that, like, yeah, it weighs on you. But there's also ways to deal with it. And so I think now that people are being more open to it, and it's becoming more the norm, I think it's important. And I think there's more of it that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you bringing all this up because it's a lot of what this is about, right? And I think that the thing you're referring to, at least a version I've seen, is the average person may be part of or witness, so it's not even their firsthand experience, but like two critical incidents or what we would call that type of traumatic situation. Whereas like a first responder, the average is like 200,
Yeah.
right? And so I like to tell people, hey, like whatever your reaction is after a thing, whether you want to talk about it, whether you don't want to talk about it with your spouse, whether you're sleeping, 2 hours or 12, it's all within normal range because it's all super unnatural, uh, abnormal stuff. And right, so just to recognize that the range of normal reaction to this ridiculous stuff is very high. But then you only really know that by talking to people, right? So whether it's peer support, right? You're mentioning car to car to talk to a buddy or a fellow officer, say, hey, I talked to my therapist about this, and just man, how much the barrier came down for that other officer to say, oh, you see one? Yeah, I'll give you his or her number, right?
Yeah.
Or I'll help you like find one. My first one I didn't like, right? And I just to be able to have those conversations is huge. And talking with this has been a really cool passion project as far as like Blue Grit, but that's a lot of what the podcast is because you can't really share all this in a short form, like a little Instagram post, but we can have these conversations. So I really appreciate guys like you and Greeny coming on, just sharing your stories, because people get tired of talking to me, listening to me. My wife certainly does, but yeah, everyone's situation is different.
Yep.
But just to talk about it more, and a dude up in Canada that I was talking through with this, and his podcast will air probably shortly before yours next month.
Okay.
But when he's writing a book based on post-traumatic stress and his experiences, it's almost done, but that's why he reached out to me. We're having this conversation, and I was like, man, I just didn't even know about, do we need another podcast about police stuff and wellness and all this? And he's like, it's not even about that. It's just, or else he said, yeah, we need more. We need more of all of it. Because it's not a competition. It's just, hey, you might just know some different people that someone else doesn't know. And the more we get talking about it, you can scale it. And maybe it's car to car one day, and then it's in a briefing the next day. And then now it's on a podcast where, 30, 100 people listen to it. Like, fantastic, right?
Yep.
And so just to destigmatize it through that repetition and just really normalizing it that way.
Yeah. And I mean, it was funny too, man. It's like, I mean, shoot, I got hired on in 2007, and, there was still kind of this old militaristic,
Mm-hmm.
do what you're told, shut up, don't
Same
talk until
time
you
as me.
earn
Yeah,
your
yeah.
way, But I think probably one of the coolest thing was seeing the change in leadership. Having somebody who maybe just went to a SIDS call, but then you expect that officer to go handle the next call. Well, that kid also has a kid the same age, that kid that just died.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But so for
Yeah.
leadership to say, hey, we want you to go home. Well, I didn't do anything wrong. You're right. You didn't. But what you just witnessed is going to affect the rest of your shift. And I'm talking some amazing leaders that came in and just said, hey, off the books, you're out of here.
Mm-hmm.
You're not losing time. You're not losing pay. We're taking care of you. Like, how
Yeah.
cool is that?
Yeah.
We never saw that before. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think for leadership to understand their people and say, what you just physically and mentally witnessed, there's ways to help you in a manner of maybe just a couple hours off and go, even if, you do the whole, I'm fine, I got it. But
Yeah.
you going to your next call is going to be tough. And so
Yeah.
we started to see a lot more of that. I think was really cool. And I really, really honor those leaders that did stuff like that and really took care of their people, knowing not just the physical, you got in a fight and we're going to take you and get checked out. Okay, cool. But it's like that mental aspect of like what you just are going through and maybe don't know how to deal with it right now. Let's give you some time and just, throw in some resources, reach out to peer if needed. But really being able to step up and say, these are the things that we value and we value you. I think that was probably one of the coolest things I saw for a change, especially at Renton. I think a lot of departments are doing that now.
Yeah. And we have a policy. And so, for those officers out there, like, see if you have a policy, right, where, a supervisor, first line supervisor, like a sergeant, can send someone home for the rest of their shift. It's not punitive. It's just, hey, without clearing it with command level, I can just make the discretion, send you home for the day. Or maybe it's like, hey, you don't have to come in tomorrow because of this call, right? It's mental health awareness. So
Yep.
Thaddeus brought up, like, hey, some people are like, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. So communication's key. So if you're a sergeant, if you're the boss, or you can inform the boss, hey, don't just send them home, like tell them the why, right? And
Yep.
especially, my generation after, so Gen Y or whatever, old millennial, as I like to say, after, like, we need to know the why. It's not like we question things. We like info. So
Right.
then they know it's not personal. And I'll just throw this out there for food for thought for all you leaders and future leaders that are listening. I've heard, and I can think of an exact example where there is this extremely traumatic car crash scene. And a couple guys took the note. Yeah, hey, Tap, when you're done here, you go home. And they said, Roger that. And they took off. They understood where it came from, and they were good with it. The third officer was one of those, hey, no, don't take me out of the thing. I'm useful here. It's like, okay, yeah. You might think that that's best for you in the moment, and that officer probably certainly did. But I guarantee you, standing there from the initial response to try to provide aid for that victim, and then stand there to hold the scene for traffic to come in the middle of the night, and then be there for hour upon hour. Was that officer useful? Sure. Were they necessary? I don't think so.
No.
And a very different exposure for those traffic guys coming in and seeing the body there, but not having that firsthand experience, hands on the person, right, bleeding out. I really, when I put on my boss hat, I think that sometimes you got to flex that and say, hey, I appreciate it, and I'm never going to question your resolve and your attitude, but not now. Like, I'm sending you home. Or, man, maybe you're like, hey, I go do your paper. I'll talk to you in an hour. We'll see. And maybe you just go to another call, right? And you maybe just backing people on other stuff. But yeah, to be there for that long, I think sometimes you got to make the executive decision. Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. So it's a good change, though. From what we had before, suck it up and drive on. You're like, well, it's not really working. So it's cool to see leaders stepping up and taking that accountability as well. And just, again, you're looking out for your guys, you're looking out for your gals, your squad and whoever's under you. And I think not just the physical aspect, but taking that mental aspect, and knowing that you're doing them a favor. And I think down the road, they're probably gonna be like, hey, I really do appreciate it. So I think that's huge.
It's changing the guard, and some people might take that defensively, the quote unquote old guard, and it's not to cast you out. It's just saying, hey, you did things a different way. You knew and had different information available. It's kind of like, doctors used to recommend smoking, right? And at a certain point, you got to say, hey, we didn't have the right information, and I'm entitled to change my opinion. And that's what's been powerful for me, being kind of in the middle right now of my career, where some to hear some of the old guard, right? They're really close to retirement, and just hear them say, man, And these are the rough and tough ones that don't talk about their feelings, but to hear them say, man, I wish we had more of that when I was, younger, or, hey, I think, or to have an older sergeant suggest doing a peer support type of debrief, like a critical stress debrief, saying, hey, I mean, I've seen this stuff a million times, but I really think it'd be good for the guys. And afterwards say, yeah, I'm glad we did that. Like,
Yep.
I mean, that's so validating, right? The proof is right
Huge.
there.
Yep.
Um,
Agreed.
yeah. So as you transitioned out, share with us what you've been doing and what helped. You said some priorities have changed, and you hinted towards your family and stuff. So walk us through that and what that was like as far as hanging up the uniform.
Man, it was not easy. I'll tell you that. It's especially when you're doing something for 14 years. You're good at it. I feel that I exceeded my expectations, and I know that I was a good cop. And but just yeah, priorities change, man. And the transition was tough. And so I was at the school. COVID hit. We were told we're going to be out of school for 2 weeks. It turned out to be a lot longer than 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we went back to patrol, and they didn't really know what to do with us because all the schools were closed. So we went back to patrol. And even in 4 years that I was in the schools, I still worked a lot of overtime. And so I never really kind of lost my pulse of, patrol work. But man, the police work itself had changed for the time that I was, doing SRO stuff. And again, and it's making good money, working overtime, working long hours. I was able to always provide for my family where, my kids were younger, of course. And so my wife was home, and again, having 4 kids, that's a full-time job. And so my son, my oldest, I think he must've been 13 at the time. And, typical 13-year-old teenager. He's a
Can't wait.
Oh, dude. Well, the crazy part is he's 15 now, and he's 6'5" and 225. So I have to make him sit in his little chair when we have our little chitty chats now, because I don't want to look up to him. But
So good.
yeah, he told me, great kid. He doesn't get in a lot of trouble. But he was doing just typical 13-year-old teenager dumb stuff. And so we were talking, and he looked at me, he goes, "You're the one that's never here."
Mm.
And I was like, wow, that hurts.
Yeah.
So being able to financially support people doesn't mean that your presence is there.
Yeah.
And so working a lot of overtime, again, working long shifts, I looked in the mirror and just realized that I was not the husband and the father I needed to be. And unfortunately, it was the career that was forcing me to not do those things. And so, yeah, I just took, again, at that point, I was like, wow, I need to make some changes. And so I just started looking kind of outside the realm, and again, not trying to be stuck in that box of, I think I told you earlier, it's like in recruiting, you take people into law enforcement from so many backgrounds and so many life experiences. I remember working with a couple, I think one of our guys, he was a financial banker. Another guy was a lawyer, really good lawyer, probably one of the smartest dudes that I know. And I'm like, why are you becoming a cop? But now you look at what he's done in police work, and it's just phenomenal. Like, his mind is just amazing. Another guy who came into police work.
Very impressive person you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, he is. Love that dude. And then, you look at guys who left police work and went to go work for Amazon, and now they're super high up in a amazing company, and the guy's just killing it. You're like, dude, these guys, the skill sets that we have as police officers can go so far beyond just police work. And I think we tend to put ourselves in a box by saying, well, I'm just a cop, that's all I know. So many of those skills transfer out. And so I think every single person I've talked to talked about transition. I read, it's a book called Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. And it really opened my eyes to what else is out there. And I mean, and it's funny, you talk about like, the strength and courage it takes to be a cop. But it takes a lot to get out too.
Yeah.
That stability. And the cool part, like I said, like we make great money, we have great benefits, and all that stuff is great. But um, when I transitioned out, like how many days you work a 16-hour day and you come home and your house is clean or there's a home cooked meal, and there's a lot of things I realized, like toilets don't clean themselves. I give my wife so much credit where I'm like, wow.
You don't just hang one of those little blue things in there, it just takes care of it.
Man, it's, and it's my, we joke about it now, but it's like, man, 14 years of being gone, and the stuff that she did, and to just to maintain a household, and then you add in 4 kids and 2 dogs and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just add up all the hours that she spends doing that, and so it's been really good for us, and me realizing that being part of that is more important than just bringing home a paycheck. And so the cool part is, so I transitioned, so I ended up retiring. I do mortgage loans. That's what I do now. And it's, the flexibility is fantastic. I can work from home, have an office downtown Tacoma that I can come to. But just to be able to be home, and I dropped the kids off in the morning. My wife ended up going back to work, but I think that's something that she really not just wanted, but I think she needed it. And I think unfortunately, there's not a lot of validation in being a stay-at-home mom. And so for her to go back to work, and she's killing it at her job now, and she loves it. And then just me realizing that, like, I needed to step up just around the house. Like, just because I come home and cut the grass on a Saturday, it's like, bro, there's a lot more that goes on than.
Well, you grill too, right? Like on the weekends.
All the time. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that carries you through at least till Wednesday.
Yeah, get you a grace period.
Yeah, it fed us all.
Yeah, and so it's like, again, it's this weird transition where into the civilian world where there's just a lot more to it. But the flexibility is there. I get to coach my kids. I got to go to practices, get to go to games, and just be part of their lives. And it was pretty funny. My son, like, actually yesterday, we were driving home, and so I have 4 kids, 3 sons, little daughter. Mm-hmm. So my 2 older boys play basketball, and my 7th grader plays up on the high school team. So we're leaving last night, and we were about to get home. It's like 10:30 at night, and my son goes, "Dad, I left my backpack." And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, son, let's go back. And so my older son looks at me, he goes, "What? You're just gonna say you didn't yell? You didn't get mad?" And I'm like, what's the point, man? He's like, "I would have been yelled at." And I'm like, hey, I'm a changed man.
Yeah, it's that stress, right?
Yeah, and it was pretty funny how he picked up on it. And I was like, you're probably right, man. I probably would have snapped at you, and I probably would have said some things I didn't mean. But it's like, I don't have a lot of that baggage that I was carrying back then. I mean, I think any first responder, any cop, I mean, you're going to have PTSD. You're going to have some things you carry with you, and you got to deal with those. And you have to have an outlet. But it was pretty cool for him to be like, "What? You're not going to yell? You're not going to snap?" I'm like, "Nah, man, just let's go back. It's going to take a couple extra minutes." And so it was kind of funny to see that, like, wow, I'm actually changing a little bit. I don't have all that built up anger and tension towards you.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool.
That's so cool, man. And I appreciate you sharing, just a little peek of like what it's like, on the family front, right? You have your kids are getting older, and it's like, I mean, you're probably counting down like how many times each kid you're going to have. I heard this recently, right, where someone was counting how many summers they had with their kid. And even though their kid was young, they're like, "Man, I only got 15 summers with my kid." And I was thinking, for me, I was like, that's what I'm guaranteed. Like, that's it, right? So 15, and then pretty soon it's all, pretty soon you can only count on one hand. You're like, man, what was it all for? And it absolutely the community, the greater good, but ultimately, like, you got you and your family. And so, and I've socialized this a bit. And I think that we just need to be more comfortable thinking, hey, if we do 20, 30 years in a first responder career, like, that's that's amazing. But anything shy of that should be something we really are proud to hang our hats on. And we should plan for that, right? We should plan for something happening that takes us out of it, not by our choice, but absolutely. It's great when you have a gentleman like yourself come out by choice, healthfully, right? And on your own terms. And so that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been, like I said, man, it wasn't easy. You're leaving stable financial for what? And of course, getting into the mortgage world when rates went sky high, and but
Yeah. You're like, why?
yeah, well,
Yeah.
I've had numerous phone calls asking me if I want to come back, and I'm like, but no, like I said, we're surviving, and I'm actually really excited. I love what I do. I think back to that whole service aspect. I now get to help people find homes. I get to help people solve problems financially, and I do. I think home ownership is one of the most valuable things, generational wealth, and everything else you can do for your life and pass down to your kids. And so now I get to help people do that and help people solve problems in a different way. And so I'd kind of just take everything that I've done in the past and kind of chalk it up to it all happened for a reason. And I'm excited for what's ahead. And if I'm surviving now and as the market changes, and I work with some incredible people and just a different type of service, but still get to help people. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and this has been an amazing chat. I appreciate it thoroughly. Where can people find you? And I will put all this in the show notes too. But if they want to get in contact, if they need a mortgage warrior, or they just kind of want to pick your brain some more.
Man, it's funny. I kind of relate it as the same way of being a traffic cop. Like I might probably be the worst salesman there is, but I'm also the most real person you'll ever meet, and I'm just going to tell you exactly how it is, and this is
I
what we
think
can do for
people
you.
love that, man,
And
especially this
but
audience.
it's
Like,
just,
yeah,
it's so funny. Like you get like just some, like I went to a conference and you just meet some like the cheesiest salespeople. And I'm like,
I hate it.
it's so gross.
Yeah,
And it's like, but the cool part is like the people that I work with, and I've helped out a bunch of Renton cops and different first responders. And so, but yeah, like I said, you can find me. I mean, Thad Kirkhoff @rate.com is my email. I have my Instagram and my Facebook is my real name. I don't hide that like some people do. Not trying to trash on Greeny, but I'm sure he's going to go change that next week.
yeah. Well, like, to speak to that, like, I think we've talked about that a little bit in one of these podcasts, but it's like, yeah, when you're an active cop, it feels wary, right? But I was like you more recently. Like, I think my Facebook, I can't change it now because I think they got tight on that. So it's just stuck as like not my name, but whatever. But no, I mean, I think a little bit of just where I was at with career and just wanting to say, hey, and I know, we talked about it a little bit, but you've written as yourself, as a Renton cop on your Facebook, your social media, written about some of the hurt and some of the hardship. And people really, they don't need everyone to be that way, but they need to see that like it's out there, and it really helps. It helps the profession when people are willing to do it. And so this is not to, pat myself on the back. It's just to say, hey, I feel comfortable doing it, but it's not for everyone. So
yeah. No, and it's again, I think, in my world now, I tell people all the time, I mean, I think if you're going to buy a home, like you have to be able to trust your realtor and you got to be able to trust your lender. And so,
yeah,
so having somebody that you trust and who's going to look out for their best interest, and of course, try to save you the most money we can. I mean, that's what I do. And I mean, just having real conversations, and just, not, nobody's judging you. Like people have issues with credit, like, well, let's get them fixed, And so it's kind of this, having these solutions to help people through it. And it's not always a short-term process. Sometimes it takes longer. But that's the cool part. I mean, I still got young kids, and the nice part is I can do this the rest of my life and help people out. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. And it's fun. I mean, again, it's every day is different, and the flexibility is great. Still going to spend a lot of time with my kids and my wife. And so that's my priorities. And so, like I said, priorities change. And I think down the road, maybe one day they'll say thank you. Maybe.
absolutely,
maybe
man.
not.
They will. If they don't say it, you'll know it.
Absolutely.
All right, that is. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it. And to the listeners, again, appreciate you subscribing, giving the ratings, and sharing this out, right, for people that want to come to the job or people that are maybe they're thinking about leaving, right? no judgment, right? The last thing we need is cops feeling stuck by those golden handcuffs or whatnot. But as Thaddeus pointed out, a ton of skills. You just need to get uncomfortable and start a new thing.
Absolutely, man. Hey, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. And I love what you're doing, man.
Thanks so much, man.